And then we have what's called divisions that you might use inside of the body tag itself. One element that can be used when we're talking about dividing the page into different sections is semantics, and this is a better way to create meaning for each section of your page. It's a newer concept with HTML5, so previous versions of HTML, such as HTML4 or XHTML, it's modern in its approach, where you can separate the meaning in the presentation. Like we were talking about, H6 is a lot smaller than a paragraph, but it still has greater meaning than the paragraph itself, as far as it's considered a heading and not just text like the paragraph tag might be. So if I wanted to show you an example, I can go to W3 Schools, HTML5 semantics, and it'll take me to HTML5 semantic elements. I like W3 Schools because they usually have a pretty good reference website. It's a pretty good reference website. So semantic is meaning, and semantic elements with meanings. You can see that. The non-semantic elements are a div or a span, and these are basically, they're explaining that it's a division, but it's not telling them what the content is specifically. Semantic elements, you can see as you get further down that they're communicating different sections of the website. Header is, of course, the top area of a website that explains overall what this website is about or web page. The nav is the nav section. Navigation menu is usually in this section, or some sort of navigation links. Then you have other semantic information such as section, article, aside, figure, fig caption, footer, details, summary, mark time. There's a lot more than that. We're also going to introduce the main tag as well, which is a semantic element. Typically when we start a website, we'll create a header section, and in previous versions of HTML, we would say div ID equals header. And we'd create a header section, and we'd put an image or a tag that maybe, this is the header of the web page. So a lot of times the about me might go there. So we'll put that there. I'm going to take off my heading tags for now. But now with semantic elements, we can actually just change this div ID that doesn't really communicate any sort of content to a web browser, and we can just call this a header tag. So now we have a header tag that is defined specifically. We might also create a navigation menu where we have multiple links that we're going to have, like a home, about, contact, and whatever else you might want. And in previous versions of HTML, we would say div ID, and then, but instead now we might say, we'd say div ID nav, and instead now we might say just cut out the div ID itself and just call it nav. Those are basically the same things, except that now we're communicating specifically to the browser what this tag is. It's a nav menu tag. And then below that we'll have our regular body tag, which we're going to add something to it later. And then below, at the bottom of the web page, we'll have a footer tag. And again, previously it was div ID equals footer div, like that. And we'd have the footer like copyright Scott site 2014 or whatever year it is. Well, now we just, instead of doing the div and the ID, we just go straight to footer. Okay? And that's how we would do the basic semantic elements. The ones that we're going to focus on in this class are going to be the header, the nav, and the footer. And then I'm going to do the main tag also. And the main is basically saying this is the main section of the site. You have the header, the navigation links or the nav menu, and then we have the main information for this web page. Below that we'll have the footer. So we want to make sure that all these tags are inside of the main tag. All the information we're going to communicate outside of the nav menu and the header tag and the footer. Okay, so the main tag will differentiate those. Now, one thing that is important in our websites is that we have a hierarchy of our content, and this is more to show to make it easy for us to read our web page HTML. So like if I had everything with no indentation, it'd be a lot harder to quickly reference different things in our web page. Right now it's a really small web page, so we don't have that much of an issue. But what helps is if we have that hierarchy to know what level of content we're looking at. So basically what we're saying with these indentions is that these tags are all inside of the body tag, and this header tag is on its own. The main tag has content inside of its tag, so all these paragraph tags are inside the main tag, and then you can see the closing tag and then the footer. So all these have their own tags, and if there's nested elements inside of a tag, then we'd create that with an indentation. So if I wanted to have one inside the header tag, like 2 different elements, I'd create that right there. But since we only have one, we can just go straight to the opening and closing tag, or you can just go straight like that and have the closing tag on the same indentation if that's how it lined up. So you can see that the indentation helps clean up the structure of the page itself, so you can follow what you're doing a little bit easier. So now again, remember that this structure of the page is very similar to this. If I went in and created all of these with div ID header, div ID equals nav, div ID equals main, and then we're going to close it with the div tag, copy and paste, and then div ID equals footer. Now remember, this is similar to what we just had, it just doesn't have the semantic elements that have been added to it in HTML5. It's gonna work the same way as far as how we lay out the page, but it's going to communicate a little bit different to the browser in that we're just giving all these divs a name for our own purposes, for our own reference. It's not telling the browser, hey, this is a header, hey, this is a navigation menu. But if we change it to the semantic elements, it'll help give precedence to that information. So div is something we're going to use in the future, and we're going to use IDs and also classes. The difference being IDs are just used one time throughout a web page. Classes are used multiple times. So if I was to give a div class of box, I could use that div class multiple times throughout a web page. A div ID is only used once. So that's why we use IDs for all of these, because we're only going to have one header, we're only going to have one nav, we're only going to have one main, and only have one footer throughout this page. Each page can have their own ID of header if we were to continue to use that. And you'll see how this affects a web page in the future. But a div is something that we will use. We just will not use it when we have the option of using a semantic element and we know what this semantic element is going to be referencing. So those are our semantic elements that we're going to use for our website. So what's the reason for semantic elements? The only real significance is that the web consortium, which is basically the group of people that make the decisions as what the standard protocol is, they're trying to determine what is the common practice among most HTML5 developers, and they delete old elements and add new ones based on what seems to be catching on and what people are using more regularly than others. So it isn't an exact science, it's more of a structural format based off of the principles that can guide a good website. So just keep in mind the semantic elements and know that they're there to help you make your site communicate more effectively to web browsers. So when in doubt, just use a div element to create the division in the website that you need. So use the div element when in doubt, but you can definitely use the header, the nav, the main, and the footer tags, as we know we'll be using those in our website. Thanks for watching.